the presentation slides and then move to questions. This presentation is going to be available on the slides that we're displaying in English, Spanish, as well as Chinese. And there's also interpretation services available for those of you who want audio Chinese or Spanish, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Today's topics will include how legislation passed by the Board of Supervisors this past March and then the past July impact you as folks who are using shared spaces outside. Folks have also had questions about when these rules that the Board of Supervisors legislated, when those will become active, when they'll come into effect. We'll also talk about who shared spaces operators are. These are all of you, but just give you a sense of the larger, your larger peer, sense of the peers out there throughout San Francisco, and then as well as some resources that are available as we move towards the sunset of the pandemic program and the legislative program that the Board of Supervisors enacted as that comes online. So as I said earlier, we are striving to provide as much language support as possible in this webinar, and you can access interpretation services in Spanish as well as in Chinese. This presentation is being recorded. That way we can also post it for later for other people to be able to watch if they're not able to attend with us today. Just so that you know, all of your microphones are muted. And if you would like to, as I said, get audio live interpretation, please click the globe button in the lower right-hand part of your screen. If you have questions during the presentation, please also put them in the chat, which is this button here at the bottom of the screen. You can type your questions in Spanish, you can type your questions in Chinese, you can type your questions in English, and we'll work to get those translated and then reply during the question and answer. So there we go. Okay, so with housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about shared spaces and what's next for everybody. Shared spaces are in many different parts of the outdoors of the public realm. Most of you, we know, operate parklets in the curbside lane where there might have been a car before. Many of you also operate a sidewalk shared space. Most often this is tables and chairs for dining. Sometimes it's also merchandising on the sidewalk, putting goods on the sidewalk and wares on the sidewalk for selling. Some shared spaces are on vacant lots, and some shared spaces involve closing down the street for a portion of the day, a portion of the week. Shared spaces are also available for non-commercial uses, for sort of purely public purposes. So in all of those different parts of the street, the sidewalk, the curbside lane, in the road, on parcels, San Franciscans, whether they're small businesses or community organizations, can apply for a shared space permit to activate those parts of the public realm. And here are some examples from around the city. We also know that many of you are small business owners are your heroes and your leaders in your own communities. And so we would love to celebrate that. If you would like to share your story about your experience as a small business operator in San Francisco, we would love to share that with our social media campaign, Shared Spaces Heroes San Francisco. And you can go to Instagram is one of the places that the heroes are celebrated, and look up hashtag Shared Spaces SF Heroes and see the profiles and the stories of your peers around the city who are making shared spaces possible, but most importantly, serving communities and being community leaders. We know how important this program is to not only you as individual business owners, but to San Francisco as a whole. Most small businesses in San Francisco, we know, depend on residents, not necessarily on tourism, not necessarily on people coming from the region, but really on people who live and work in San Francisco. and those people rely on you. Residents and workers rely on you. We know that a large proportion of you really rely on your neighborhood residents, people who live within walking distance of your businesses, who live within biking distance of your businesses and your restaurants. And we also know that you tend to have your smaller companies, and so this is it's a powerful sector, but in some ways it can be a vulnerable sector too. And so that's why Shared Spaces is here to stabilize and to support and to protect San Francisco small businesses. We're really proud that so many small businesses in San Francisco are also women-owned. About half identify as women-owned, and that a number of small businesses in San Francisco are also owned and operated by immigrants or minority identified business owners. And that's something to be proud of, and it's something to protect, to stabilize, to protect, and to keep encouraging. Some of you may have applied for some grants recently. We just wanted to also signal that there are more grants on the horizon. Later this summer and the fall, we will be announcing support and assistance for arts and culture activations, usually in our roadway or private lot shared spaces, as well as increased technical assistance for some of those larger shared spaces. We also anticipate opening another round, a third round of compliance grants for parklets. So more on that soon. There's a lot of need out there. We know many of you are hurting and still reeling from this ongoing, economic crisis. And we also just want to be transparent that we don't necessarily have grants for everyone to pay for everything. So the city is really focusing on geographies where the most vulnerable people are concentrated. Most vulnerable populations include youth, seniors, linguistically isolated households, immigrant households, and households with persons with disabilities. Those areas are called areas of vulnerability as defined by the Department of Public Health. We're also going to be focusing and have been focusing grants in geographies and parts of the city that have been hardest hit by COVID-19, both from fatalities and from deaths. I'm going to go a little bit faster so that we can get to the end and leave time for questions. Okay, so the Shared Spaces program is going to sunset in March 2023. What does that mean for you as businesses? Well, it means that we're going to be working on rebalancing curbs functions on blocks and in corridors across the city. During the pandemic, many shared spaces went up everywhere. And as the economy recovers and commercial districts become more and more active, we have more and more need for commercial loading and unloading, goods movement. There are more people moving around. We do need to make sure that we have adequate, especially loading capacity on blocks. So this means that some parklets, especially, might need to resize, relocate, or be removed in order to make sure that loading activities can happen safely. We also want to make sure that we are creating really safe conditions at intersections where people driving cars and people walking and people biking can all see each other. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So at this time, until March 2023, shared spaces permits are still all free. So you can, if you don't have a shared space at this time and you want to operate one, between now and March 2023, you can apply for one, get a permit, there will not be a fee. Starting March 2023, fees will be assessed. These will be application fees as well as license fees. And there's a chart of those fee amounts that we can look at a little bit later. Another thing that's really important to know at this time between now and March 2023 is that now is the time to fix any issues, design issues you might have at your shared space, especially those that have to do with fire safety and emergency access and accessibility for people with disabled persons with disabilities. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the really important features that your parklet needs to have. The Board of Supervisors has legislated that if the city needs to, we can start issuing fines and fees for parklets that are unsafe or not accessible to persons with disabilities. So permit fees and business license fees won't be assessed until March, but before then, there's still the potential to be penalized with fees if your site is not adequately ADA accessible or meet the city's safety standards. We're currently working on visiting shared spaces sites and giving what is called a single bill of health. This is an example of what a piece of paper that you may get that tells you all of the things that you might need to fix at your parklet in order to continue operating that parklet after March 2023. So you can see in this example, there are a lot of things for this particular parklet owner that need to be fixed. And not all of those things have to be fixed right away. Some of them are more urgent, like those having to do with safety and accessibility for persons with disabilities. Other things we're letting, the city is letting parklet operators take longer, as long as they need really to fix those things. We won't be able to issue permits in April 2023 unless there is work to abate all of these issues at your site. All of these guidelines, and we're going to get into some specific examples in a minute, are in the Shared Spaces Manual. This is a resource that was created by Maria de Alba and Gary Chen here at the Planning Department. It's a really, I think it's a beautiful document, but it's also a very easy to understand document that will help you diagnose whether or not your site meets safety and accessibility requirements. So we're going to focus in on the last part of the presentation on these three key ideas. These are things that are need to be addressed now in the short term or as soon as possible. Here are some examples: clear path of travel on the sidewalks to allow wheelchair users or other people using mobility assisted devices to pass through the neighborhood without being blocked by chairs or tables or A-frames or service carts. We also need to make sure that every 20 feet in a parklet that there is access. There's a 3-foot wide gap between the street and the sidewalk that allows the fire department and other emergency response personnel to get to the building, out into the street to where rigs and ambulances will be parked. It's also really important to be able to see through parklets. Many parklets, especially during the pandemic over winter, built walls, really tall walls around their parklets that completely block visibility. So that really, that makes it harder and impossible really for our emergency response teams, firefighters, paramedics, et cetera, to be able to respond effectively to see what's happening at a site of emergency and be able to act. So we'll get into some of these in a little bit more detail. But again, the Parklet manual that Gary and Maria have put together is a really great resource for everyone. You can download that at the link shown here in the bottom right, sf.gov/shared-spaces-manual. It's available as a PDF. So let's talk about accessibility and us at the sidewalk. Here's an example kind of a bad shared space, because the distance between chairs and fixtures on the sidewalks is less than 6 feet. We need at least 6 feet, ideally 8 feet, of clear area down the sidewalk in order for people to pass, and especially for wheelchair users and others to pass on the sidewalk. So here you can see that the distance is less than 6 feet and there's a pole in the way. So it would be really difficult or impossible for a wheelchair user to pass through this area. Here's a great example on Mission Street, just south of 16th Street, of a 6-foot wide path of travel that is wide enough and is not obstructed by any chairs and tables. One thing that this setup is missing, though, is diverters at each end of the dining area. What else is important in terms of accessibility? Well, we want folks, especially handy-capable people, with a wheelchair to also be able to dine outside. So there are two ways to provide this facility right now. You can make sure that if you have a parklet, that the floor of the parklet, the deck of the parklet is even with the sidewalk, as shown in the larger picture, and that a wheelchair can get in and out, and that there's space for a wheelchair to turn around and pull up to a table. If that's not possible for you right now to create a level deck with the sidewalk, you need to make sure that there is an ADA accessible table on the sidewalk itself nearby. Let's talk about emergency access. We saw this photo a little bit earlier, a version of this photo. It's really important for the fire department and paramedics to bring ladders, to bring equipment, to bring gurneys to and from the sidewalk. And so every 20 feet, maximum, every 20 feet, we need a 3-foot gap. This is an opening in the parklet wall that's unobstructed, that is free of bicycles, free of tables, free of carts, free of bike racks, free of poles, that allows emergency response personnel to move back and forth. The 3-foot gap also needs to be open to the sky. So you can see here in this photo that there's no roof over that 3-foot gap. It's open to the sky because sometimes equipment is really tall and we can't be impeded by roofs and other structures. So here are some good examples, or here's one relatively good example of a 3-foot gap. And here's some examples of very long parklet sites that are definitely longer than 20 feet and do not provide the kind of visibility as well as the access that our emergency responders need in order to save lives and to do their jobs. Here's a site just off of Calle 24 that has a lot of good things happening. There's a 3-foot gap. You can see there that there's a 3-foot gap open to the sky. It has some railings on the outside, but those railings are easily removed by fire department personnel if they need to get in there. So they're not fixed railings, but they're movable. We can also see that above 42 inches or on the upper part of the wall of the parklet, it's clear. So that if an ambulance or a fire truck or any other first responder pulls up on scene, they can immediately get out of their vehicle and they can see everything that's happening on the sidewalk and everything that's happening along the front of the building. That visual accessibility is really important. Here's another site that's quite beautiful, I think, from a design point of view. But it doesn't meet the safety requirements that we really need all parklets to have. You can see that there's plants on the upper part of the wall, and the plants are beautiful, but they really make it hard to see between the street and the sidewalk. This site also does have a 3-foot gap. It has an opening in the wall, but it's not open to the sky. You can see that there's actually a roof over the 3-foot gap. So the advice that we would give to this parklet sponsor to make it safe and to make it responsive to what our emergency personnel need is to have take out the plants and use a different strategy to beautify the wall and to also open the roof in that section, in that 3-foot gap section, so that the roof doesn't get in the way for ladders and other tall safe equipment. Here's an example of how a 3-foot gap could look. You can see very clearly from this example that the railings are easy to take out if they need to be taken out by the fire department. And there are no chairs or tables or bus carts or anything sitting in front of this 3-foot gap, right? It's accessible, so there's absolutely nothing getting in the way of our safety personnel. Here's another example, a really well, a beautiful site that looks like it was made with really great materials and it was constructed really well. But the problem here is that there's no visibility in that upper part of the wall above 42 inches above the street. So that, again, that blocks the ability of us to see from the sidewalk to the street and vice versa. What is good about this site, though, is that it still maintains airflow between two sides of the parklet are pretty much open, or air can pass through, because we are sadly still in a pandemic. And the advantage of parklets is that they're outside versus being enclosed spaces, so that we need to maintain their openness. Here's the site we looked at before, but a little bit earlier, but from the street instead of the sidewalk. And one thing that's great about this site, besides the fact that it is beautiful, is that the address for the storefront is displayed here on the left side of the opening. You can see the address 419. That's the address of the building behind the parklet. That's really important for, again, firefighters and other first responders to be able to know where they are and orient themselves when they're responding to an incident. We already observed that the 3-foot gap is not open to the sky. That roof really needs to come out for this to be a compliant site. And then one comment from our Mayor's Office of Disability on this picture is that the chains aren't really easily detected by someone who is visually impaired, who can't see very well. Whereas the rigid railings are easier to detect. So rigid railings would be a better strategy to sort of put a barricade, a removable barricade across the 3-foot gap. Here's another example, again, of something really creative and inventive. I love the mural on the outside of the parklet. I love the hanging plants. It looks like it's really well designed and was made with quality materials. These are all great things. But again, it's too long. It needs to be broken up with a 3-foot gap so that we can get in and out. The fire department can get in and out. And then here's an example too of a site that does not have the address, the numbers of the building on the parklet facade. San Francisco's cold. It can be cold sitting outside, and so space heaters are something that we use all over the place, right? But we need to be able to use them safely and place them in the correct position. The fire code establishes that a space heater like this one, a liquid propane gas space heater, that's sometimes called a mushroom heater, really needs 5 feet of clearance around it on all sides. It can't be under a canopy or next to any combustible materials, because that's definitely a fire hazard. So here's a great example of a different type of liquid propane gas heater. It's out in the open. It's not next to anything flammable. Okay. Here's that same type of fixture, but in the wrong position. It's too close to wood, to flammable materials, and that's definitely a fire hazard. So those are some things to keep in mind. We're almost done. We'll talk a little bit about safety at intersections. It's really important for people who are driving, or people who are walking, or riding their bikes, to be able to see one another at an intersection. So what you can see here is some parklet installations that are too close to the crosswalk. So when somebody is, for example, driving down the street and they're approaching the stop sign, sometimes you can see here the stop sign is even blocked by the parklet. They're not able to see people standing at the curb ramp or on the street corner, or maybe already inside the crosswalk, and vice versa. Somebody who's, a pedestrian that's trying to cross, it could be an elderly person, it could be someone, who is handy capable, doesn't have good visibility for cars that might be approaching. So that's why we really need to make sure that the areas around crosswalks, the curb areas around crosswalks, are clear of tall structures like this. So the parklets need to be set back from the crosswalks 8 feet when you're approaching the intersection. So let's say you're in a car, you're driving towards an intersection, there needs to be at least 8 feet of clearance from the parklet and the crosswalk that you're approaching. Far side, as you're driving through the intersection and you're approaching the opposite side of the intersection, you need 8 feet on that side, and you need 20 feet near side. We're also making sure after March 2023 that parklets don't take up too much space. Some parklets during the pandemic got really big, some stayed really small, but moving forward, our guideline is that parklets should be no more than 2 spaces combined. So if you're a business operator you really want to be thinking about 2 spaces max. This makes sure, this allows for other people on the block to also have access to parking spaces to maybe operate a parklet. More importantly, it makes sure that we have, as a city, the flexibility to use the curb and establish uses at the curb for things like commercial loading, passenger loading, and all of those other really important parts of a functioning commercial district. We want to, avoid situations that encourage double parking and loading in bike lanes and so forth. And so a 2 parking space maximum is a really important idea. So some of you who have more than a parklet that takes up more than 2 parking spaces, you probably already have received a notice, or you should expect to. With very rare exception, everyone needs to get to 2 parking spaces or smaller as we approach April 2023. All right. Some other things that are important as of April 2023 is making sure that the ends of your parklet are set back 3 feet. So we have a 3-foot requirement inside the parklet every 20 feet, but also that the ends of the parklet don't go all the way to the edge of the parking space. Why do we need to do this? Well, it's to create more access. We talked about that earlier. So it gives the fire department, paramedics, other first responders more options for navigating around parklets and being able to respond to sites. It's also a safety measure, especially when a parklet is next to an active parking space where vehicles are pulling in and out, to have a buffer and have clear areas between a fixed structure and then an area where vehicles are moving in and out. So here's a good example on the left of a site in the outer Sunset off of Judah that shows a 3-foot buffer between the edge of the parklet structure and the parking space. You're giving clearance for things like the overhang of trunks or bumpers. And then you could see here, it's really important to create that space again, especially when parklets are right next to each other, to create an area to move back and forth. I love that there's plants and potted trees out on the street, but in this case, they get in the way. There's also a pole in the way. So when you're thinking about and working with your neighbors to come up with a parklet design, that you're maintaining that clear area. Also starting in April, every parklet will need to have at least 1 bench that's open to the public. This is a bench that anyone can sit at, whether they're buying something from your business or not. That's a really important rule the Board of Supervisors passed, goes into effect in April 2023. There are also different types of parklets now. Before COVID, we only had 1 type of parklet, Tier 1. Now we have Tier 2 and Tier 3. Tier 2 parklets are movable. These are an option for you if you don't want to invest in a fixed parklet. You can take over the parking lane just during business hours, and then you have to remove everything from the parking lane so that area can be used, for example, for loading. Folks have also, are curious about fees. These are the fees that the Board of Supervisors legislated for parklets. Again, they don't go into effect until April 2023, but these will be showing up on your unified license bill after 2023. There is an equity waiver for any of you who are making $2 million or less. There's a half fee waiver, so you would only pay half of this amount. I think what we're going to do is actually end the presentation here so that we can get to questions. This presentation is going to be posted, and the recording of this session will also be posted. So folks can go and look at some of the other extra slides with the extra information. I'm about to hand it over to Ryan Wotsek with the Mission Merchants Association, but before I do that, I just wanted to thank our producer, Annie Yalon, who has worked with Calle 24 as well as with the Mission Merchants Association to put this together, and it's going to be putting together many more town halls to come. So this won't be the only opportunity to get information. Thank you, Annie, for your work. All right, Ryan, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn it over to you.
All right, Robin, thank you very much. Thank you to all the agencies that showed up today. Thank you to Calle 24 and all of their board members and members that have showed up today. We have a few questions to sort through in the chat. I'm going to be sorting through a few of those, and then we also have Cantonese and Spanish translation. So hopefully all questions can be answered today. First question I want to ask, and this is probably for SFMTA, but we have the bike lane changes that are happening on Valencia Street. There's been an active push for bike lanes to be moved to the curb pre-pandemic, and with the new investments in the Parklet compliance, it would be great to know before more investments are made.
Yes, the project team, Livable Streets, a division within the MTA agency, is looking at alternative locations for the bike lanes that would allow the parklets to remain curbside. So at this time, it's not final. We haven't gone to our board for design approvals yet. I can circle back with, I'm not sure if that's you or another organizer of this meeting, with the timeline of when that decision will be made and legislation will advance. But I will share that the revisiting the bike lane design is largely in part to allow for shared spaces parklets. So yeah, I'll say that for now and have to circle back with the schedule for when final decisions will be made.
And when do you think that would be?
I don't know. That's so I'll circle back with that timeline of when the decisions for a final design will be made.
Okay, so you'll circle back. It could be like a month or so, perhaps.
I will circle back sooner than that.
Okay.
Within the next week or two.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good to know, because yeah, we will be getting a lot of questions after this meeting, and just want to be able to give some clarity. All right. The next question that we have is, we have a bench right outside our restaurant attached to the building. Is this okay, or do we need to build a special bench just outside the parklet?
Thank you for that question. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, it doesn't have to strictly be in the parklet. If you are operating a commercial parklet, we also are asking that that you as a sponsor are providing a public seating facility or option. Okay. And Gregory has his hand raised.
Just to be clear, when you say there's a bench outside, is that to facilitate public seating? That's just a standalone? It wasn't clear to me what the purpose of that bench is. So can I just have a little bit more information so that's clear to me?
Yeah. To the Kelly, you asked that question. Do you think you could let us know what you were thinking? You can type it in the chat. It used to be what? It used to be a flower pot. And then they installed a bench.
Got it. That might require, so shared spaces seating, there's different ways that we accommodate outdoor dining seating, and we can do it through a parklet, which we've demonstrated capably here. And then we also do tables and chairs permits. Having a bench just propped outside of the building is not permitted under either of those, and could potentially be a minor encroachment. The big issue for Public Works, or the reason that it might be a point of concern, is that without diverters, someone with a visual impairment, if they were traversing that sidewalk and they had a stick out to assist them, if they weren't able to, if it wasn't flush against the bottom, they weren't able to see that, feel that with their stick, they would walk right into it. So I'm going to encourage you to reach out to Public Works so that we can get a little bit more clarity as to what you have out there and what you would like to do there to ensure it's compliant. But one thing that I would be assertive is that throughout the pandemic program, we've allowed folks to facilitate accessible seating on the sidewalk and kind of supplement the parklet. in the legislated program and in the permanent program, that accessible seating needs to be a part of the parklet itself. It can't be supplemented with any auxiliary seating or permit. If that's not clear, we can discuss more.
Okay, that was very helpful. All right, we have a few more questions, and then I'd like to hand it over to Diana at Calle 24. So the next question is, can I apply for a movable parklet in a yellow zone?
Yes, that is one of the reasons that we created that. It's really important to remember that everything needs to come out of the parklet outside of your permitted hours, and that the permitted hours can never overlap with when the yellow zone is established. So this is a new thing for us as a city, and it's very different from how other cities are experimenting with their parklet program. So it is something that's possible, and but will require different kind of operations as a normal parklet. Mari Hunter is here from the MTA, and she's actually in charge of parklets on the curbside. So I don't know, Mari, if you wanted to add anything.
I just wanted to quickly piggyback and reiterate, if it is a movable parklet, everything has to be moved out every single day. And it needs to be stored someplace that's not on the sidewalk or another part of the street. So acknowledging that there's another layer, as Robin mentioned, of those operations if you want to have a movable parklet. If that seems really difficult, we are happy to work with folks if it's possible. I mean, the yellow zone was located there for a reason. If it's possible, we're happy to examine if the loading zone can be relocated, shifted over, in which case you could have a fixed structure. But again, that's a case by case. Just want to make sure everyone understands everything that goes into a movable. It is less expensive, but then the operations are a little bit more maybe. And again, we're happy to check on the possibility of relocating yellow zones. Thanks.
Thank you. I have two more questions that I'd like to ask, and then I'd like to hand it over to Diana. And then there's still a few more, so maybe I can follow up with those after. But the next question is, will the city be paying and maintaining the required public bench?
Thank you for that question, Benito. The required public bench is something that the parklet operator needs to provide and maintain. So that's part of the obligation. It's part of the responsibility. It's part of the liability of having a parklet. Folks may remember that before COVID, parklets were actually always all public. And at the time, commercial activity, private dining, revenue generating activity was something that was not allowed. And so now during COVID and after COVID, it is allowed. But part of that change is requiring some kind of publicly accessible seating facility at or around the parklet.
All right. I would like, I do have a handful of other questions that I'd like to ask based off the chat, but I would like to have some of the Spanish questions that have been asked in Spanish and for some translation. So I will pass the mic to Diana at Calle 24. And then perhaps that I can run through the rest of the questions.
Hi, this is Diana. So there are some questions in English, and I have been trying to do the translation from English to Spanish in the chat. Ryan, what question would you like me to translate?
I'd say any question, or have you put them all into the chat already?
Yeah, like the questions that have been answered through the chat in English, I have been trying to translate all of them to Spanish and sharing them on the chat. So, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta en español y quisiera colocarla en el chat, con mucho gusto nosotros podemos también traducirla. If someone has any question in Spanish and would like to type it in the chat, we will be more than happy to help you out to translate it in English.
Diana, are there any
Okay.
questions that have been asked in Spanish in the chat that you think we should also try to answer in English that we should talk through?
I haven't seen any question in Spanish so far.
Okay.
Oh, great.
Well,
Okay, thank you.
And I have a bunch of questions that I could sort through. So perhaps if you see any questions pop up, we can get to that and just let me know. All right. So next question I have is, how is good standing judged?
Good standing. Good standing is a term that we use to describe a permit that doesn't have any compliance or safety issues or accessibility issues. Or you might be a site that needs to fix some issues, but you've been communicating with us, you've been responsive, you have been working with inspectors and other city staff who've been trying to communicate with you. We could also consider that good standing. I think we all want the same thing, right? Which are thriving commercial corridors that are also safe and accessible. And so if you are, responsive to some of the work that we're trying to do with you to make your individual site safe and accessible, then that helps to keep everyone in good standing.
Great. This kind of piggybacks off of the movable parklet in a yellow zone. How do I go about requesting to move a parklet a bit further down the street, yet still in front of our building?
If you email shared spaces at sfmta.com with your business address, we can pull up your case file and see where the footprint may be. Just so you know, if it is a metered block, parklets must be done by meter. We don't permit half of a meter space. So just want to make sure that that's clear, that we permit parklets on metered blocks by a meter space.
Next question is, how long will the application take?
The application for a permanent parklet can take as little as 10 minutes to submit online, maybe even shorter. But preparing the materials before you submit it online, of course, will take time. So by November 2022, we are asking that anyone who wants to have a parklet after March 2023, we ask that you submit an application in November of this year. This will give us time to look at your materials, to look at everyone's applications and make sure that we're avoiding conflicts and making sure everything is safe. So part of that requirement, or part of that submittal is and Gregory, please correct me if I'm wrong, are photographs and a drawing of your site. And so it might take you some time to prepare and collect all that information. Some of you might want to pop up in front of a neighbor. So let's say that Mari's Pizzeria is next to me. I'm, Robin's coffee shop. Mari wants to have a parklet and she wants to use a parking space that is mostly in front of my business. She'll have to make sure to get a letter of consent from me and submit that as part of her application. Now, if Mari wants to occupy a parking space, but it's mostly in front of her own business, she doesn't need to get my permission. She only needs my permission if that parking space is half or more in front of me. So it will take time to pull all of those materials together. We also want everyone to understand what the design guidelines and the safety rules are, because your application needs to show that you are either going to be fixing any of those design issues at your site, or if you're designing a new site, that your new site will be compliant with all of the safety and accessibility guidelines. So it'll take a while to put together. Once you have everything though, putting it into the web form is a relatively quick one-time process. Gregory, I don't know if there's anything, or Mari, that you wanted to add on to that.
It was a perfect example because I wanted to make sure that people were aware of a rather creative solution that we've seen with Mari's Pizzeria. I only operate in the evenings, and Robin's Coffee Shop is in the mornings. And when businesses really are sharing parking spaces, or one's more in front of another, and we've seen businesses partner with each other. It saves on expenses. One business actually has to apply, so there's something to be said about the owner of the permit and what comes with that. But businesses have been very collaborative, and the coffee shop, their customers are pretty much just using it in the mornings, and then the pizzeria is in the evenings. So I want to make sure that folks are aware that that's a possibility, that you can share it. It's an arrangement businesses make with each other. So thanks.
Great. And then after the application question is, for the process of filling it out, how long will it take for it to be approved?
Gregory, do you want to talk about the transition period and then our standing legislated turnaround time?
Yeah, so just to illuminate the audience for some context of what happens when someone requests a parklet, the initial request is reviewed by MTA for just categorical feasibility. Is it right on an intersection? Is a red zone? Is a yellow zone? Is a white zone? Is it whatever it is that MTA looks at? They kind of, before we scrutinize it, they spare us by ensuring it's viable. So once MTA looks at it and they say, hey, this is within the permitted meets and bounds, it's not an excessive amount of space, the curb space that they're requesting is appropriate within the curb use of the block, et cetera, they forward it to the Public Works team. The Public Works team then scrutinizes the actual site a little bit more, and we're going to look at that site plan. So another way for the review time, a part of it is going to be contingent on what we receive at Public Works. So another way of looking at it is like, how long does it take to drive to Oakland? Well, half an hour. But what happens if I get in the car and I left my keys in the apartment? Well, that just added 5 minutes. And then what happens when I get in the car and I realize, oh, shoot, we don't have enough gas? That just added 10 more minutes. And then so on and so forth. So what I'm getting at is that the preparation that goes into those submittals will ease review, which is to say that sometimes during the initial pandemic program, we would ask for an attachment and someone would literally on a piece of paper write like, we'll send it to you later. We can't review that. That's dead time. So that's not going to take away from turnaround. Typically for parklet permits, we had a 30-day turnaround for review. And that means that it's a complete application, which means everything that we would possibly need to look at is there. I would encourage folks, cost is not indicative of acceptability for these applications. We've had folks create diagrams that have no design expertise or whatever, that they're literally, they're a vendor and they are in the food service industry and they created this. They have no background whatsoever. So I don't want folks to think that it's in the course of creating a site plan that it's something like, oh, I have to hire an architect, I have to spend money. May necessitate some time, energy, and effort on the part of permittees, but not necessarily money therein. We have some sample diagrams in the manual. And if you were like, oh, if you feel intimidated, take a look at the sample diagram and see if you can replicate something like that for your own site. For one of the questions that we got about staff, Public Works is the appropriate staff to answer questions on your actual permit for like the diagram and modifications and something to that extent. Right now, we don't have standing walk-in hours. However, our staff is very responsive. We can schedule a time with you if it is necessary to meet in person. One thing let me be clear on is like we can answer questions. We can't design the site for you. We can't fill out the application for you. We will review it and then respond with an itemized list of issues. The team has been conducting these reviews way before the pandemic for cafe table and chairs and pre-existing parklet programs. So they have a pretty systematic way of presenting things. They'll circle it. They'll have arrows pointing to things that need to be moved. And that's why it takes some time, because it is a thoughtful review. Additionally, once we review this site plan, permittees have to conform to it. So if we approve you for whatever, 3 2-tops at a certain configuration, that's what you're bound to set things up to. You can't freestyle. And if you were gonna make a change, you'd basically have to submit a new application. And that's another reason why we have this deliberation on the front end. Yes, creating a site plan is a challenge. Yes, maybe waiting for 30 days is a challenge. If all you have to do after that is simply submit updated insurance and any renewal documents, the notion is that we're putting that effort into the front end so that you can just kind of set it and forget it in perpetuity thereafter. So that is going to be our general turnaround. What we're looking at and how we're reviewing things. There's no decoder ring for this. It's mostly the stuff in the manual. No, let me walk that back. It's only the stuff in the manual. That's what we review it against. So if you're curious, what happens, like I said, it's going to go to Mari and her team at MTA. They're going to look at the feasibility of the actual space you requested. Then my team is going to grab our magnifying glass, hold it over your site and ensure that there's accessibility, that the gaps are there. And if it goes beyond your frontage, that you have proper consent. One thing I would like to put out there for permittees, we are going to require updated consent when you do renewals. So maintain that mindfulness. If you've got a good relationship with your neighbor and it's really easy, then maybe it makes sense to go beyond the envelope of your business. If you have high turnover, if you don't get along with folks, you don't want to create a situation where you're trying to get a piece of paper 2 years from now that you can't get. So and to that extent, smaller is better because you're going to have more autonomy and you're going to be less reliant on others. This is a more streamlined consent and community engagement process than we had for our pre-existing Parklet program. Before, you had to get permission from neighbors, even if you were only within your envelope. Now, if you're within your envelope, you don't need to bother other folks. So it was some give and take in our process development there. And I hope I've answered things, but if I haven't, please bring it to my attention and I'll be succinct in addressing.
Thank you. Got a next question. In a permanent parklet, may tables be allowed to stay bolted down? In our case, the tabletops would fold down so that they would not be able to be used when the business is not in operation.
Thank you for this question. As long as your site, again, is safe and provides access for emergency response and to persons with disabilities, we don't really micromanage your design. Something that I think we should all think about, and we know many of you as small businesses think about, is what the parklet is contributing to the neighborhood, what it's contributing to the public realm. So I think what we want to try to avoid is a bunch of sites that don't really contribute or do anything or add anything unless you're open. So before COVID, our parklet design guidelines really encouraged flexibility of use, different options for seating. Single-use parklets are not generally not a positive addition because they can only sort of do one thing or look one way. So, if bolting tables or having fixed tables is the only option or, sort of design choice that you want to make, we're not going to say no, but we encourage everyone to think about sites that are beautiful and versatile and can perform a function and contribute to the neighborhood while you're not open. Keep in mind that after March 2023, all parklets need to remain open between the hours of 7 a.m. and midnight. So that will influence how you think about design and how you're going to build your parklet and the features that it's going to have. The rule to keep parklets open between 7 a.m. and midnight is something that the Board of Supervisors established in city law.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, if a parklet has been abandoned and trashed and is a blight, what is the process to get that removed? And I think that could be maybe like a general process of it's actually troublesome to the community?
Yes. Well, first of all, nobody wants this. The city doesn't want it. Merchants don't want it. You know, people who live and work in the neighborhood. We don't want trashy sites. You know, we're always encouraging operators to, if they're considering creating a parklet, especially a fixed parklet, that it really is the right business decision for you, that it's something you can maintain, that it's something that you can operate, that's going to be something that's going to help you sustain through the pandemic and beyond. And we know that there's a lot of hard decisions that you have to make, and there's a lot of complexity to the world that you operate in. But if you're not sure that you're going to be able to sustain a parklet or dismantle it if you go out of business, please think about that. As a permit holder, you're always liable for the parklet, whether you're in business or not, whether you're operating or not. If you hold a permit, you're responsible for keeping it clean, for maintaining it, or removing it if your business is no longer operating. Especially after April 2023, the city will be pursuing folks who have abandoned their parklet sites in order to make sure that they get cleaned up, and that the neighborhood can remain a thriving and beautiful and safe place. For folks who are listening in who have noticed a parklet that seems neglected, or maybe it's a place where you're always seeing trash, or you're always seeing problems or issues, we really encourage you to report these incidents to 311. That is really important, and that helps us, that helps me and Gregory and the fire marshal and Mari and her team and our folks understand where there are consistent problems, so that we can focus and target our efforts to make things better. So with 311, you can do it on the 311 mobile app. You can also use a link. There's a link in the chat to the 311 form. There's a form that's specific for parklets. Take a picture, tell us the address, send it in. This helps us form a body of record as well. If we have to issue a notice to remove, we want to be able to do that with a lot of backup and a lot of documentation and a lot of evidence that issuing a notice to remove the parklet is actually warranted, because there's a track record that's publicly accessible, that's transparent, that a site has been more of a problem, than a positive addition to the neighborhood. So that if it's not in here already, I'll try and find that parklet specific 311 form. That's really, really helpful to us. If you can please take a picture, send it to us through 311.
Great, thank you. Next question is for potential modifications, where can we find help with the drawing? And if we decide to, can we draw it on our own?
Gregory, do you want to take this one?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, and I think it's in the chat, so let me just, you can do the drawings yourself for any modification, for any site plan. And that's what a point of emphasis is. You don't need to be a design professional. I will try to, again, look through the manual. There's diagrams for seating there. We're not looking for like design charrettes with like people and pretty pictures. We're looking for the physical envelope of the site that you're going to be occupying. And what we're most interested in observing when we look at this is that there's clear passage, that there's a 3-foot gap, and that you meet your ADA requirements within that diagram, so that we can approve that. And again, this marks a streamlining from prior processes. For our parklet program before, this did require some professional design drawings, because it would often be a street improvement permit that accompanied this. We've sought to make the process a lot more nimble and remove expenditures for businesses, and as such, the degree of detail in those drawings is going to be much less. So when I think modification for a drawing, what I would think we would be most interested in is I'm reducing the footprint of my parklet. There could be other modifications within that parklet that might not even be present on a diagram. So for instance, the gap along the curb to make sure that stormwater can flow. We're not going to ask to see like some cross section that demonstrates that curb flow, which we actually would have in the Parklet program, but for these permittees, we're not going to require that, but you are going to have to affirm that there's appropriate. That's one of the checklist items. So yes, you're affirming, and if you said yes, there's room for water flow, and one of our inspectors came out there and there was not adequate flow design, then it would be non-compliant and we would have to follow up, and it might necessitate. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. The core question: who can do drawings for modifications? You, him, her, them, they, anyone. Anyone. You don't have to have any credential. It's going to come in from the permittee. If you've got a friend that's savvy at it, go for it. If you want to hire someone, go for it. If you want to do it yourself, go for it. The one thing I would put out there, as I mentioned before, one of the big questions is how long this is going to take, how long this is going to take. Well, if you give us a really crummy drawing, it's going to take a long time because we're going to have a ton of comments on it. You're going to have to revise it, et cetera, et cetera. So to that extent, cost, credential, not indicative of acceptability, clarity, effort, probably a good acceptable permit. If you have specific questions, let us know. And that drawing we're gonna require, and we're gonna do a visit to your site at a point to ensure that what we have on file with your application and that we approved is symmetrical with what's actually out in the field. So don't try to pull any fast ones on us to that extent. It's just gonna re-engage us, that's all.
Do you have any recommendations on designers? Let's say that someone does not have connections to a designer or an architect. Is there any resources for that?
No, but also what I would say is a few things. I don't endorse designers or vendors because it's putting my thumb on the scale. Like, so to that extent, we're never going to say here's like our preferred vendor list, because it implies endorsement, acceptability. There's tons of stuff going in there. But like I was saying, you may not need to hire someone. So yes, we've had landscape architects or design folks create these before. Alternately, I've had high schoolers submit them. So what I would encourage is confidence on the part of our permittees that they have the ability to undertake this task, and that if they don't, there's a likelihood someone in their immediate sphere does. If someone was at a total loss, I might direct them to Robin. Robin, I see your hands up, so I'll let you jump in here. But in short, my answer is you can do it. Anyone can do it. We're here to support you. We put a lot of effort into the manual so that you can do it. Follow the instructions in the manual, and it's going to be easier than putting together a kitchen table.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Gregory. I also
yeah.
just wanted to, Ryan, let everyone know we'll be making an official announcement soon. It's not ready yet, but we will be organizing trainings, a training certification program for contractors, general contractors, designers, architects, anyone who might be involved in creating parklets and shared spaces. The goal of this is to help put these sort of design and building professionals through, it will be a short sort of training, and there'll be, possibly a kind of quiz or an exam, so that we can issue a kind of certification that you've been through the city's design program. We will, we're not precisely sure how it will work yet, but we want to let folks know that if they want to work with a design professional or contractor who has gone through this training program, that they're accessible to them, because we all want the same thing. We want quality with parklets. We want parklets that are easy to maintain, that are beautiful, that don't cost a lot to make or to upkeep. And so please look out for that. What'll be a kind of certification training. We're hoping to do that sort of around the end of the summer, maybe in the early fall. There might be more than one session, because at that time, many of you will probably want to be working with some kind of a contractor or designer to modify your existing site to make it compliant for April 2023. So, so please stay tuned for that.
And Robin, actually, if I could jump in for a second, that to everybody from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Our office's SF Shine's Design Services program is open right now, which provides free design services for small businesses. It's not a shared spaces specific program, but people can seek design services assistance for shared spaces in addition to other modifications or work with their storefronts. And I'll put a link to that program in the chat.
Thank you. We have another question, and it kind of goes off, it's somewhat ties into that last statement. And this goes back to the public bench, but will the city deduct or refund any costs for maintenance and build out of the public bench that's required?
So again, the public bench is part of your parklet or shared space. So it's part of your responsibility to create. It's part of your responsibility to maintain. So it's part of your responsibility to the public realm and to the neighborhood as a parklet operator, as established in city law. So if you want to create a parklet after April 2023, part of it does need to be publicly accessible, and that's part of your responsibility.
Got it. And to that point, something that Annie called out in the chat is everyone should think about submitting their application by this summer if they're able to, for there is going to be an influx of applications in the fall and it'll kind of slow things down likely. So please get your applications in as soon as possible. See what else do we have here. There's still some other questions. Oh yeah, and Annie also said that there will be hosting a parklet design program for contractors and designers in mid-July, and we hope to have a list of people we can recommend after that. Feel free to reach out to the Mission Merchants Association or Calle 24 or anyone else on this chat to get that information. And then let's see here. Someone asked, we have had someone come out and do measurements of our parklet. Will someone reach out to us and let us know if any modifications need to be made? And I'm assuming someone from the shared spaces program. They didn't say who.
Sure, please email us at sharedspaces@sfgov.org with your address, and if you have any photos or measurements, let us know and we can take it from there.
Great. Trying to, is there a publicly available map of current shared spaces in use throughout the city? If not, is there a plan to create one?
There is a map, and there's a couple links in the chat. The short link is sf.gov/shared-spaces-tracker. Shared-spaces-tracker at sf.gov.
Thank you. And I am not seeing any more questions. If any of the panelists see that I missed anything, please call it out. And if there are any more questions that I missed, please chime in on the chat, but I think I've filtered through pretty much.
I think Mari's noticed a couple, maybe.
Okay,
Yeah,
please.
I believe I saw one regarding ability to put a parklet in a passenger loading zone, which is painted white, so white zone or passenger loading zone. And it's a maybe. Similar to commercial loading zones, which are painted yellow. Just if you've already submitted an application, that will be part of our review process. If we can relocate it, we'll work with some of our passenger loading zones are sponsored. And so we'll connect with that sponsor. If it is something associated with for example, a transit station, like one of our subway portals, those are unlikely to be relocated because those are critically placed to facilitate that connection with transit. But if it is sponsored, we are happy to examine whether it needs to be relocated, or it's possible that it's outdated and we don't need it anymore. So just either email us or with your application, that's something that we evaluate.
And then another question came in right after that one. What about converting a parklet to a white zone? What if, okay. Oh yeah, what about if we decide that we want to convert our parklet to a white zone as we decide that drop off and pickup is probably better for our business than the parklet? What's the best way to go about that?
So they have a parklet, they no longer want it, they want to have the passenger loading zone instead.
Yeah,
If the passenger loading zone doesn't exist yet, then you simply apply for color curb. And that's on the SFMTA website. You just have to Google color curb. It might be CCP color curb program. If it already exists, you just say that you no longer are going to be, this is what Robin mentioned before. If you want to discontinue your parklet, Public Works will discontinue your permit, and you are responsible for removing your parklet.
great. I feel like we've sorted through all the questions. If anyone did not have their question answered, please feel free. You're welcome to email me directly, or reach out to the Mission Merchants Association, Calle 24, or anybody from the Shared Spaces program. We're all here to communicate and help and assist. And anybody else that would like to chime in as we wrap this up, please do.
Yeah, just one final thank you to you, Ryan, and the team over at the Mission Merchants Association for helping put this together, and also our colleagues and partners over at Calle 24, Diana, Andrew, Susana, and our Cantonese interpreters, Maggie and Laura, also Diana for the interpretation with Spanish. So we're really grateful for the partnership, and we really are here to help small businesses. So we hope that this was informational, and there will be more, and we will be trying to get more information to you all in many different ways over the coming months to help you prepare for April 2024.
Yeah, and thank you, Katie, also for the translation support as well with Kaye. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Let's be in touch. Have a wonderful week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.